We shall be starting our first session for today, and I welcome our chairperson, Dr. Mukesh Paryani. A very warm welcome, sir.
Good morning. Yeah.
I will also like to welcome our first presenter, Dr. Rudhima Bagli. Ma'am, can I request you to please share your screen and start your presentation?
Yes, thank you very much.
Thank you so much, ma'am.
Good morning, everyone. So I'm going to start off this instruction course with anatomical and functional changes that happen post-corneal refractive surgery. But this is going to be discussed in the context of what role they play in making our regular IOL-PAR calculation inaccurate and trying to understand why these errors occur and what we can do to overcome them. So I'm going to discuss some basic concepts, some theoretical discussions, and hopefully when we move on to more practical case discussions further down in the IC, this will be of use. So to start off, IOL-PAR calculation needs the measurement of three basic variables: the corneal PAR reading, the axial length measurement, and the effective lens position. Of these three, only the axial length is measured directly. The other two are derived, and that's where errors occur post-corneal laser refractive surgery. So there are three sources of errors in IOL-PAR calculations. Each of these we're going to discuss further down: the instrument error, keratometric index error, and IOL formula error. So why does the instrument error occur? It's because the regular keratometers or topographers that we use, they measure the keratometry at a zone of 3.2 millimeters and not at the bank center of the cornea. And why would that cause an error post laser? That's because the paracentral reading that we get tends to be steeper than the absolute center in a myopic treatment. And this is more so relevant if your optical zone is small or it's a decentered treatment, we will get an erroneous keratometry reading. So to overcome this, we need to discuss measurements that will give us more central readings and machines that I think Dr. Vishal Arora will discuss further on. The second error is the keratometric index error. So the keratometric index of refraction is a standardized arbitrary figure of 1.3375. And this value is used to derive the corneal power measurement in diopters from the radius of anterior corneal curvature that we derive from our keratometers or topographers, so that it would give us the power reading in diopters. And this is a source of error because usually the corneal power is a summation of the anterior as well as the posterior corneal curvatures. However, a single keratometric index of refraction is assuming the cornea to be a single refractive lens. It's assuming that it's a single refracting entity by assuming a fixed ratio between the anterior and posterior corneal curvature. While this may be true in unoperated or virgin eyes, this ratio is generally considered to be 1.21. What happens after a myopic ablation? In LASIK or SMILE or PRK, we are flattening the anterior corneal curvature. And then the posterior, as we see here in the next figure, the ratio between the anterior and posterior curvature gets disrupted, and then the keratometric index is invalid. That results in an overestimation of the corneal power measurement. So there'll be a 1 diopter overestimation of K reading for every 7 diopters of treatment that we have performed for myopia. An overestimation of K results in an underestimation of IOL power, and we would most likely end up in a postoperative hyperopia. And the exact reverse would occur in a hyperopic LASIK treatment done, wherein the K value is underestimated, resulting in an IOL power overestimation and a most likely postoperative myopia. So the higher the attempted correction, the higher is going to be the resulting under or overcorrection. So to overcome the keratometric index error, either we need to reduce the KI index, like the KI proportional to the amount of correction that has been done, or we need to separately measure the radius of curvature for the anterior as well as the posterior corneal surfaces using either the Scheimpflug or the ray tracing, or like swept source OCT, like the IOL Master now gives us a TK or a total keratometry value by separately measuring the anterior and posterior surfaces. So this is important for post LASIK cases. The third error is the formula error. The routinely used third or fourth generation formulae like the SRKT, the Holiday, Hoffer-Q, all of them, they are going to predict the effective lens position. That is where the IOL is going to sit in the eye. And for this prediction, all of them mostly use corneal power as one of the variables. The Hages is a K-independent formula, but the rest use corneal power to predict where the IOL sits, and then it results in an error, because if you enter a very flat reading, like after your myopic treatment, the reading is 40 diopters, it assumes that this eye has a shallow anterior chamber and the IOL is positioned anteriorly in the eye, and it would then predict a lower IOL reading. So it's underestimating your IOL power after a myopic laser. Whereas after a hyperopic laser, if you were to enter a steep reading for the K value, it would assume that it's a deep AC and the IOL is positioned posteriorly, and it's going to overestimate the corneal reading. So this is a compounding effect. So after a myopic laser, you're overestimating keratometry, as we discussed earlier, and we're underestimating the effective lens position. And both of these are going to underestimate your IOL power, and you're going to end up with a hyperopic post-op error. How is a post-RK different? Like, though we don't do it routinely, we still see patients post-radial keratotomy who come for cataract surgery. So since we're not removing any tissue at all, do these errors still occur? Is it the same kind of conundrum or error that we're expecting? So yes, all three errors do occur even post-radial keratotomy. In RK, there's a very small optical zone, so instrument error is extremely relevant. The KI index, so as you see here, after a myopic LASIK or SMILE treatment, only the anterior corneal curvature is flattened. Whereas in RK, with incisions that we give, there is a flattening of the anterior as well as posterior surfaces. And maybe one were to think that, okay, both are flattened and the ratio is remaining intact of 1.21, but no, that does not happen, because the posterior corneal curvature flattens even more than the anterior corneal curvature. And the keratometric index of refraction again is invalid. In RK, another effect is the mechanical instability of the cornea that further increases the unpredictability of our IOL power calculation. Also, during surgery, sometimes if the incisions were to give way, that would further contribute to central flattening of the cornea, and that can persist for quite a long time. So these have to be considered while selecting an IOL power. So to overcome the formula error, what options do we have? Either we use K-independent formulae, like I had mentioned earlier, or the Adamberry double K method of modifying the third generation formulae. So what this does is, the pre-refractive surgery K is used to determine the effective lens position, and the post-refractive surgery K is used to calculate the IOL power in the formula. So if you were, okay, you don't have access to the fancy IOL masters or so how would you yourself manage to use this double K method? You can use the pre-refractive surgery K, either if it's clinically known, the history is known, it can be taken directly. Or if it's not known, you can predict it if you have the post-refractive accurate K reading and you know how much the correction was. For example, if your current K reading is 40 diopters and you know that a 4 diopter treatment was done, then the pre-K would be like 44 diopters. Or it can also be predicted using the posterior radius of curvature. Like we are saying that after a myopic LASIK, the posterior radius of curvature is not changing. So if as of now, it is 6.54. You multiply that by 1.21, you'll get the anterior radius of curvature, and converting it into a dioptric value would give you the pre-K reading for that particular cornea. Or there are also arbitrary measurements from which you could derive the pre-K as shown in this table. So post-refractive surgery K calculation is, I think, going to be discussed in the next talk, but just if in the gist of it, either you know a clinical history dependent method, the reverse of what I had discussed here. That means that the post-K can be calculated if you know the pre-K along with the change in refractive treatment. That means if the K previous to the surgery was 45 and you've done a 6 diopter myopia treatment, it's going to be a 39 diopters as of now. Or similarly for a hyperopic, it's going to steepen by the amount of correction. Or if you don't have the history available, there are still modified corrected keratometry methods or tomography methods. So for the K corrected methods, there are empirical formulas like the Sharma's that is used commonly and it gives really good results, or there are theoretical formulas or the Cock and Wang formula. The measured K, a modification factor is suggested from which you can derive the true K, or tomography methods, a modification to the measured values from topography. So these the double K method does improve the accuracy. It has earlier been used for only the SRK-T formula, but now it has been included in the Holiday 2 program, the Hofer-Q. However, not all formulae allow the entry of two separate values of keratometry. So just to summarize what formula, depending on what history is available, if you have the pre-K reading as well as the pre-laser refraction as well as the post-laser immediate refraction, we can go ahead with the clinical history method. Whereas if you do not have a reliable post-laser refraction, but the pre-laser K as well as refraction were available, there is a Fies-Mannis formula that uses only the preoperative K along with the axial length to give you the IOL power. If the pre-op K was not available, you can use the double K method. The pre-op K was available, the refraction is not available. You can use the double K method for sure. And coming to if the preoperative K is not available, but you knew the amount of refraction that the patient had, there are nomograms like this. Like if you know that, okay, a 5 diopter treatment has been done for myopia, then you target a minus 1.5 in the targeted refraction after cataract surgery. And if no history at all is available, then we have formulae like the Sharma's, the Rosa, the Ferreira. So I hope this basic introduction has helped, and as we move on to more practical discussions, it'll get even more interesting. So thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Dr. Ridhima. That was wonderful and crisp, covering of the anatomical and the functional changes that happens post-corneal refractive surgery. And yeah, it was actually very good the way you explained the Ehrenberg double K method, because that's something that people sitting in the clinic can easily do it. So we'll move on to the next topic. Thank you so much, Dr. Ridhima. The next topic is what are the preferred modalities of investigations when these patients come to your clinic? And to cover that aspect, we have Dr. Vishal Arora, who practices in Gurgaon, and he's going to enlighten us with his talk. Dr. Vishal.
Thank you, Dr. Mukesh. Thank you, Dr. Ridhima. It was such a nice talk. You covered most of the aspects of everybody's talk, and we are going to now take it away forwards in detail. So we are going to discuss about the investigations and their role in personalization for selection of an IOL in post-refractive case. So what are we going to learn or revise in this is what are the diagnostics required? What are the tips if you have an ectatic cornea, and what values to put from various machines? I know not everybody has the luxury of having multiple machines, but the formulas give us what we say the independence to use various machines and use their values into the calculation. So if the basic thing is, first you should have an online post-refractive IOL calculator. We'll discuss which one to use. At least a single topo or tomographic data, accuracy of your immersion or an optical biometry, and if you have the luxury of having a pre-LASIK data or a post-LASIK refraction prior to development of cataract, that would be great. Most online tools are, we have the most commonly used the ASCRS calculator. Then we have the Holiday IOL Constant, the Hofer-Savini tool. How do you access your calculator is the most commonly used the ASCRS calculator. How do you use it? So you just go to any search engine, just start typing ASCRS IOL calculator. You'll go to the first result. It will give you a disclaimer that guys, whatever you do is your thing, and then you'll have 3 options: prior myopic, prior hyperopic, or prior RK. So according to history, you go to each of them. You'll get this kind of chart which will have blanks where you can put in the data from various equipments, which we are going to discuss in this talk. And this is true for hyperopia and true for RK. Most of the topographers are common to all 3. So I'm going to just give an overview of this. as Dr. Ridhima has already told you that how do you calculate a true corneal power, there are various methods. One require pre-refractive surgery data, other are independent of the pre-refractive surgery data. The most, if you have the luxury that you have a pre-refractive surgery data, I'll just touch upon that. How do you calculate the post-op K if you have the pre-refractive surgery data? So it's quite simple usually. So we have to first calculate the spherical equivalent at the corneal plane. We always have a spherical equivalent at a spectacle plane. We can easily derive the spherical equivalent on the corneal plane using this formula. Then we will look at the change in diffraction from pre to post using that. And then we'll arrive at the mean post-operative K. So I'll just start with an example. So if we have a person who has a mean pre-operative K as 42 diopters, and he has a pre-operative refraction of like this, -10 diopter spherical with a +1 of cylinder at 90, and a post-op refraction at a -0.25 spherical and a +1 cylindrical at 90. This will give us a spherical equivalent. Pre-LASIK would be a -8.52 and a post-surgery spherical equivalent of 0.25. The change in refraction, which is the delta MR here, is around 8.77. This you will subtract from the pre-operative K to arrive at the actual mean keratometry values, which will be the accurate value for this patient. Now coming to the equipments. So there is a column for putting values in the calculator. So we have first the topography. In topography, you have the ICIS. So ICIS is a Placido-based topographer, and it has a special value called the effective refractive power. The effective refractive power is to be put directly into the small box here and can be derived from the Holiday diagnostic summary, which is displayed on the ICIS. If you have the latest Atlas 9000, it will make your things really easy because there are multiple values that you can put in Atlas. Either you're using a RK calculator or a hyperopic calculator or a post-LASIK calculator. You can use the ring values at 1 mm, 2 mm, 3 mm, 4 mm. All Atlas have this. You just have to go to press F2 when you are at the axial map. After pressing F2, you just go to the data and just select the rings. It can give you values till 8 millimeters. So most commonly used value is from the 4 millimeter ring, which is the central zone. If you have access to TOMI, either TMS4 or a TMS5, you go to the Placido part of TOMI and you can get directly a ACCP value, which can be put and fed into this. Gella is a dual shine flux system. It directly gives you the total corneal power, which is ray traced, and what they say is pretty accurate. I have not used it personally. The most commonly used is a pentacam. So pentacam, this printout is basically an EKR report of the pentacam. Whenever you see a EKR report, first look at the power distribution. If the distribution is compact, that means the cornea is a little bit regular. If it is not compact, you may not even arrive to the actual corneal power even after using these values. So if in this case, this is pretty compact, if we look at it as an example, and we look at the 1 mm, 2 mm and 3 millimeter zone, some people use these values in the Atlas topographer's column there. I would advise not to use it. It is better to use the 4 millimeter zone value of the true net power. You can have the true net power calculator, or you can always go to this column here, which I'm pointing, and you can change your zone diameter here. And it will change the values here, and you can get the exact power of whatever you want. So after doing everything, you have put in all the values from whatever topographer you have, and put in the best biometry or the immersion data. You just hit on calculate. If in calculation, you will have the 3 columns. If you had used the pre-surgery data, you will have the column 1, in which the clinical history method would be the most commonly arrived power, and it will be most accurate. Then if you have only the change in refraction when you have used the formulas, or if you have no prior data. So nowadays we only have this most commonly, and in this I usually go by the Sharma's method. And if I have a clinical history, if they give me a scan before of the LASIK, which I have only received in one, so and at that time only a placebo base, so couldn't do anything. So most commonly in practical aspect, I think Sharma's or Hagees is what is being used for us. So to summarize that, if you have all the data as mentioned earlier, the clinical history method is the best. If you don't have the data pre-surgery, only you have the K, which is after, I mean, the patient has just presented to your OPD. I think it is better to go by Sharma's post-LASIK formulas. Now coming a few slides on the ectatic corneas. Ectatic corneas have a, I mean, very weird phenomena that we can't use most of the IOLs to give the best post surgery result. The problem is because we don't have a toric IOL which can conform to the cornea. So that is the biggest fallacy here. But what you can do is that once you have a pre-data and they present that, yes, they have an ectatic cornea, you always look at the cone. If the cone is outside the 3 millimeter zone, it is better not to use a toric IOL. If it is in the 3 millimeter zone, it is the toric IOLs usually give a very good result. So to summarize, if you have a decentered cone, just take a mean K from 3 to 4 millimeter zone, avoid toric IOL. You can plan for a corneal customization later. If you have a central cone, toric IOLs give a very good result. Okay. So I hope I was able to simplify the things here. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Vishal, for some lovely take-home messages. The first message is certainly the use of the ASCRS calculator. Now, despite even if you don't have the advanced topographers with you, which is actually preferable because these patients are highly demanding, but even if you don't have those, that ASCRS calculator have some segments where you can simply put the keratometry values which you get from routine keratometry devices, and then perhaps you can go ahead and use that last segment, which gives you with the Sharma's no history method, which is fairly accurate. Another point which you clearly mentioned is not to use that equivalent K reading in that zonal readings. That's very accurate. A simple way is that use the Placido values in a place where the Placidos are used, and Scheimpflug, you have to enter in a Scheimpflug, and you'll get a fairly good amount of accuracy. So thank you, Dr. Vishal, for that lovely covering up the aspects of using the ASCRS calculator, which helps every one of us because we don't finish our calculation without that.
Thank you.
So moving on, once we know that we have the good IOL power calculation done, what IOL to select is something which I would be covering. So without wasting any further time, I will go ahead with an IOL selection. And also just to this thing, there are some wonderful case-based examples which Dr. Varun and Dr. Karishma will be covering after my talk. So that would further simplify our thing. So selecting an IOL, these patients, they are Superman without glasses. They've always believed that, and that is one of the reasons that they have planned their LASIK surgery or the corneal refractive surgery in the past. So they are quite highly demanding patients. They have huge expectations, and they are not wrong in that. They are patients, they can have expectations of always being without glasses, and they don't want glasses for near and intermediate, and also they don't want to further compromise on the quality of vision. But we have to be realistic. We have to explain them the real nature of how the post refractive surgery, these calculations and the outcomes actually work. The scope of the presentation would be how to decide which IOL to go for, how to little bit counsel the patients regarding the same, how to have a happy patient, and most importantly, how the surgeon can sleep peacefully. It has been already covered that the myopic LASIK, the anterior curvature flattens, nothing happens really to the posterior curvature, while in post RK we have the flattening of the anterior as well as the posterior curvature. Now, this is very important. What happens to the spherical aberration? Because when we talk about the IOLs, we have variety of IOLs ranging negative asphericity, positive asphericity, and so on. What really happens in myopic laser correction, you see that the spherical aberration, the peripheral rays converge more than the central rays, giving us a good amount of positive spherical aberration onto the cornea. When the cornea flattens, this spherical aberration increases more towards the positive side. Now, this happens in a myopic laser correction. What exactly happens in a hyperopic laser correction is a spherical aberration jumps onto the opposite side because of the induced prolateness or the induced steepening that happens in the center. So you have the spherical aberration that actually jumps onto the opposite side. Similar thing happens in patients who have undergone a myopic radial keratotomy, and you will have a jump of the induced spherical aberration towards more on the positive side. But here there are a lot of other aberrations because of the shortened optical zone. You will have a lot of trefoil, pentafoil coming into the play. So once I have and calculated IOL power in my mind, the questions that ponder in my mind is, should I go for a spherical lens or an aspheric lens? Should I go for a toric or should I not go for a toric? Should I go for a multifocal or not? We all know that the spherical aberration is something, the only aberration as of now, which we can modify by the use of intraocular lenses. That's what it aims. So the more peripheral rays of the cornea which converge more, they kind of help them to converge less and have a pretty much bang on image onto the retina. So in post myopic aberration, if you see here, the patient is having, this is a patient who's had a myopic laser correction in the past, and you see that the spherical aberration is 0.22 on a plus side. And obviously these are the patients who will be really happy if you give them a negative spherical aberration IOL. What happens in cases when you have an hyperopic LASIK? Well, these are the patients who usually have on the negative side, as I told you. The choice of IOL would be either a positive spherical aberration IOL or at least an aberration neutral IOL. So just to simplify, this slide is very important. If you have a patient who has undergone a myopic LASIK, we make the cornea oblate by central flattening, and it induces a more positive corneal spherical aberration. And the choice of IOLs will be certainly the negative spherical IOLs. While on the hyperopic LASIK, it's more of the prolate, and there we go for a spherical IOL or an aberration neutral IOL. These are some of the examples of the IOLs that are no financial interest in any one of them, but usually these are available to us, and we can choose amongst these IOL based on what exactly is the patient is post myopic LASIK or post hyperopic LASIK. Needless to say, but I would always prefer a pupillography to be done in these patients, and also take keratometry value which is coinciding with the mesopic pupillary size, because they have, particularly in RK patients, the keratometry value jumps from zone to zone. So in these patients, I would always prefer to do a mesopic pupillary size and keratometry value on the topography taken in that particular zone and used for the IOL power calculation. The next question that comes, even if I have some amount of toricity, will I go for toric lenses? First of all, I need to find out what is the type and the magnitude of the toricity that we are looking at. We have to be sure that, the moment your cornea has undergone a laser surgery of any kind or an RK surgery, they are biomechanically different. They're biomechanically weak, and the outcomes can be compromised, particularly in cases of an RK. So first and foremost is to identify whether we are dealing with a regular astigmatism or an irregular astigmatism. Now, once you are planning a toric lens for a patient who has come to your clinic and you are not having any topographer, at least only an Placido disc system would also help us to find out whether the patient is having regular or an irregular astigmatism. Regular astigmatisms have wonderful outcome. Irregular astigmatism have compromised outcome. It's not that you cannot use at all, but the outcomes cannot be promised, and it can be compromised outcome. This was a case which was shared by Dr. Karishma. She did similarly. The image here that you can see on the right hand side is the patient with the regular astigmatism, for which a toric IOL was planned, and the patient had a pretty good outcome of 0.25 cylinder remaining. So a careful selection of the patient is most important, and above that is the counseling to the patient, that we are attempting to make it close to an emmetropia, but there are always chances that some residual error might remain. Now the question comes, toric lenses in prior RK is highly have compromised outcome, and you have to absolutely under promise these patients, because even if you have well centered the cornea which is not very looking aberrated, but because of the RK cuts itself, the toricity or the SIA is going to be very high. Incisions, obviously, you can think of when you're planning. If you have space, go for a clear corneal. If you don't have space, you can go for the limbal. The third question that comes to your mind is whether to go for a multifocal lens or not. Now, yeah, it's in limited role as optically compromised cornea, but to be very frank, the newer machines, they induce less of the corneal aberrations. But the multifocal use should be very judicious in these patients, because you have a cornea which has already reduced the contrast sensitivity of the patient, has already induced some amount of aberrations. You're putting a multifocal IOL, which is also known to reduce the contrast and in some cases induce an aberrations. So you can't have really both the optical systems compromised. You can use multifocal IOL, but it has to be very judicious, and you have to make sure that you under promise if you have to be happy. The role of topography in this is very huge. Only and only patients in whom that you have a well-centered ablation and the ablation zone lesser than the mesopic pupillary, ablation zone more than the mesopic pupillary size, then only you go for a multifocal IOL in these patients. Now, if I have a really flatter cornea like this on the right-hand side, this is a myopic LASIK, I would certainly not go ahead with a multifocal IOL, because such flat corneas and the jump of the keratometry value, if you can see, is from 34 to directly 49 in the first outer zone. The patients are certainly gonna land up in a problem. On the other side, if you see, this is a patient who had undergone an hyperopic LASIK, a keratometry value of 48.6 to start with, and in the immediate 5 mm zone, you see the keratometry value of 40.2. These are the patients, despite having a well-centered topography, are high chances that they might be unhappy patients for a multifocal. Now, this was a patient, I'm just sharing one small example to conclude that this was a patient who just barely remembered also whether they had undergone a laser surgery. So they asked for a multifocal, and we obviously asked for a history of any corneal surgery. She vaguely remember that some laser surgery was done in the past. So the optometrist went ahead and did post LASIK formula. If you can see on the right and top is a Higgins L formula used. But then we certainly insisted that we want to do topography for that particular patient, because the keratometry value was 44 and 45. This was the topography of the patient. Well, this was a post hyperopic LASIK looking at, and the topography was well centered and smooth. So we went ahead with a non-toric multifocal IOL. As I discussed earlier, these are patients who would perhaps go for a spherical or the aberration neutral lens. So we planned for an aberration neutral lens. We did not go for a negative spherical aberration lens, and somehow we were able to have a decent outcome of around 6.9 and N8 with the refraction of on Autodesk, because the patient was happy, so we didn't even mind to do the refraction, and we got a fairly good outcome. So, but you have to be very judicious, fairly limited role of multifocal in post LASIK patients. So take home message, IOL selection is as important as the IOL power calculation post corneal refractive surgery. We need to have at least a Placido. If you're planning an MF IOL or a toric IOL, you at least need a Placido topo. And if you have a Scheimpflug imaging, that's very good for calculating the IOL power, and obviously online. IOL Master or Lenstar, if at all you have, these all will sum up and basically reduce the choice of the range of IOLs that you can offer. And always under promise to the patient. And thank you so much for your kind attention.
Thank you very much, Dr. Mukesh. It was a lovely presentation with some very useful tips and lovely illustrations as well. So now I would like to invite Dr. Varun to proceed with his talk.
Am I audible to everyone? Is my screen visible?
Yes, Varun, go ahead, please.
Good morning, everyone. Good morning, my fellow instructors. Well, we've all heard Dr. Mukesh and Dr. Vishal and Dr. Ridhima talk about the theoretical aspect of it. I'm going to be talking about the practical hands-on approach that we can take, especially from the point of view of someone sitting in a tier 2 or a tier 3 city as myself. To begin with, hang on a second, something's hung. So just give me a second. Right. Hang on a second. I'm really sorry for the confusion. Are we back on?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Yeah, so I have no financial disclosure. The beginning, I would just like to say that what we've heard is all about the theory of it. And in theory and practice are the same, but in practice, sometimes they are not. But again, theory and practice do go hand in hand for proper learning and getting the optimum outcome. We've just heard Dr. Mukesh and Dr. Vishal talk about what values to use in which machines. I will probably slightly contradict the two of them with a few examples that I have, and we'll take it from there. So initially we used to all be very, very scared of the mathematical formulas and different techniques that we had to use to calculate the IOL formulas. But now, like already mentioned, we have the online calculators. The one that I generally use is the ASCRS calculator. Again, how to get into it, everyone has already enumerated. I'll just go into a little bit of detail. This is the calculator for post-myopic LASIK and PRK, which has places to enter the patient data, the pre-LASIK PRK data if we have any, the topographical data, and the biometry data. All this has already been discussed, so I'm going to move ahead and I'm going to try and go directly to the case reports. So this was a very interesting case where one patient had shown me in two different centers I used to visit. The 39-year-old male and who had got a LASIK done about 10 years prior to presentation. He had NS3 to NS4 in one eye and early lens changes in the other eye. This was his refraction, and don't be scared with the -15 spherical refraction. This happens when there is a nucleus sclerosis of that amount. So in one of the centers that he showed me, we had two machines, the IOL Master and the OBSCAN. And the other center where he presented himself had two different machines, the Pentacam and the LensStar. So why I took this case up is because I wanted to show you that regardless of what machines you have, you can still play around with the values if you have the basic knowledge of what a particular value of a particular machine is measuring. The key in all of these measurements is to try and figure out the corneal power at the centermost part of the cornea, right? Bang in the middle. Because most of these machines don't actually measure the center, they extrapolate the center part through the other readings. So if we can extract that information, that is the most key part of this entire IOL calculation method. So yeah, both the centers, different machines, same calculator. Let's talk about the center one where we had the IOL Master. This was the K reading in the IOL Master, and the OBSCAN gives us a total axial power or the centralmost corneal power on the axial map. Here we can see it is 33.4 diopters, slightly flatter than what the IOL Master shows us because the IOL Master measures around 2.6 to 2.7 millimeters from the absolute center. And it's the flattening in the centermost cornea which really matters. So we took these values, we put the biometric values in the biometric section, and we only took the total corneal power of the Galilee wala section, which corresponds to the centralmost corneal power that we measure from the OB scan. We do have literature to prove that the Galilei total corneal power and the centralmost corneal power in OB scan do correlate, and I'll be happy to share that literature if anyone is interested. And then we calculate. So this gave us a calculation of around 19.6. As you can say that we don't have any prior K data. So only the non-K dependent formulas were engaged, and we got a value of 19 diopters. Then the patient visited the second center where this was the biometric value from the Haagstry or the Lenstar. And we had the Pentacam there. Like Dr. Vishal mentioned, that it is the EKR report which we generally use for measuring the K values. Now, contrary to what Dr. Mukesh and Dr. Vishal said, we have had very good results by using the mean EKR values in the zone 1 to zone 4 millimeters and putting these values for the Atlas ring values, substituting them for the Atlas ring values, and also using the 65% mean in the IC's effective refractive power section. Again, I have data and the literature to say that these two values do correspond to each other, and we have to make these kinds of adjustments because there is no one center which will have all of these machines. So if you have a machine which does not which is not enlisted in that formula in ACRS, you have to find a way around it. Try to find a way which where your machine has some value that can be substituted in the values which are enlisted in the ACRS calculator. Then we go ahead and we enter the values where they should be, like I already mentioned. And once we calculate, we get a lens power which is about 0.5 diopter different from what we were getting earlier. Of course, we have more amount of information that we were able to update in the center 2 with the help of a Pentacam. So my gut feeling would be that this would be closer to the actual refraction. In the end, we ended up putting a 19.5 diopter lens, and the patient was left with a 0.5 diopter myopia. Now, in a post-LASIK case, a 0.5 diopter of residual refraction is something I will take any day. Similarly, if we just went a little back and saw how much the power IOL master and Lenstar were calculating, we would have probably made the patient hyperopic by about 2 to 2.5 diopters. Now, this is something very, very interesting, which I always share with all my colleagues, especially for people in tier 2 to tier 3 cities. We don't even have access to topographers. Would the online calculators work if we just had the the IOL master or the Lenstar, just the biometric data? And I went back and I put in the values for the same patient using just the biometric data with the ASCRS calculator. And to my surprise, it wasn't off by that far, both with the IOL master and the Lenstar, which made me realize that people who have had flattening, which is not very high, supposing the post-LASIK flattening is around 35, 36 and above diopters, then even when you just enter the normal biometric data, and in extreme cases where the patient is understanding and you're relatively confident, you don't have access to topography, it is not a bad idea to try just the IOL master data or the Lenstar data on the calculator, although I do not advise that you use it as a first choice. But in places where you don't have access, what are you going to do? So this is the last resort that we can sometimes maybe revert to. This is another case. It's an interesting case where we put a toric lens in a patient who had the pre and post LASIK stable refraction available. So again, this is just to show that the amount of data that we have, the more amount of data that we can put it in this calculator, the more accurate the reading will be. You can see that we have the pre LASIK data. I wish I. So the pre-LASIK data is available, and also the post-LASIK data. We enter the IOL, the biometric data, and this is the power we got. It was about 9. We used a 9.5 diopter toric lens. We used that to calculate the toric axis, and at the end, these were the results we got. Which again, a 0.75 residual cylinder with no residual sphere is something which we can even be happy with normal patients. And again, the same point, if we had pre and post data and no topographic data, and we just used the plain biometry, we would still have got almost similar readings. So this is again to reiterate that last case scenario, if we don't have proper data, we can even use these calculators with a normal biometer. What I would like to point out is that the K values here, again, you see that the flattening is not too much. If the flattening post LASIK was in the range of 32, 33, 34, 35, then this probably might not work, because what these formula actually do, they subtract the present K value from a normative K value that they have calculated from their database. So in a sense, it works like a historical K value wala formula, but that is done at the back end. So that is why they call it K independent formulas, but in fact, they are actually engaging K values which are derived from the normative data. And hence, if the flattening is too much, then the deviation from the normative is too much. And then only IOL master or only biometric data being used in these cases might not work. So here it has worked because the flattening is less. I hope I made that point clear. And so the key takeaway would be, regardless of the method employed for biometry, the ASCRS calculator always gives a more precise and more acceptable reading in results for post-refractive surgery IOL power calculation. I hope I've made myself clear. I'll be happy to take any questions. These are my references. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Varun. Amazing case presentation that you actually saw, shown us. And the most important take-home point that, even if you don't have any of those topographers or the high-tech equipments, we can still land up with a very good and fairly close to emetropia values in the IOL power calculation. That was a really nice presentation that you gave us. And moving on to the last talk, I invite Dr. Karishma Wadia. She would be talking to us about IOL power calculation in a post-RK patients and in those who are having an corneal ectasia. So, Dr. Karishma Wadia, you can immediately start, please.
Thank you, Dr. Mukesh. Before I start, I would like to thank Dr. Varun. I was not aware that you can use the values of the OBSCAN in the Galili. And interestingly, I was just speaking to Dr. Vishal the other day, and we have been using the values of the Sirius and the Pentacam interchangeably, assuming that they are both shine plug devices. But Dr. Vishal brought it to my notice that we have a publication on that which says that you cannot use the data of the Sirius interchangeably for the Pentacam. So that's a point I thought I should bring up right now. So let's begin with IOL power calculation post-RK. I have no financial interests. My other colleagues have already covered about what are the main tools required for the calculation of IOL power after any keratorefractive surgery. So I won't waste much time of that. And my colleagues have also covered the various situations that you may be in. Situation 1, where you have access to topography, but a regular biometer and not optical. Situation 2, where you have access to optical biometer, but no topography. And third is where you don't have access to either. The most important thing that you must know is that whatever situation you are in, do not hesitate to reach out. You can always send your patient to another center which has access to topography or which has a topography, and that will always help you get better and more accurate data. So let's move to our first case. I'm sorry about that typographic error where I have written case 2. It's a 52-year-old male with RK done 26 years back. All right, and the preoperative refraction back then, as per the patient's memory, was around 3.5 diopters. And post RK, he has some papers which documented that the refraction was around minus 7.5 diopters. The current refraction is minus 10.75 with a cylinder of minus 0.75, and he is best corrected to 6.9. The lens was around NS2 with posterior cortical opacities. Now, as my colleagues have already discussed, we got a topography done. The topography showed that there is quite a regular astigmatism in the central zone. If you look at the central area, then this is what it looks like. Okay, there is not a very significant astigmatism, just around a cylindrical power of minus 1.8. And in the series, you have to look at the refractive equivalent power, okay, at the refractive equivalent power, and you get a value over there, which is of the mean pupillary power, as you can see highlighted in the center, 38.28 in this case. Now, in the IOL power calculator, you get the option of clicking, just like you have prior myopic or hyperopic LASIK, you also have prior RK. Now, when you use that value, you enter the data that we already had, and it gives you, as we discussed earlier, an average IOL power, a minimum and a maximum. So in this case, it was showing us the average IOL power of 3.9, and so we chose the IOL power of 4, and the patient underwent an uneventful phacoemulsification. But if you see on post-op day 1, the patient has a refraction of plus 2.25. However, when you follow up this patient, over 1 month, there was a reduction of the post-op hyperopia to 1.75, and over 3 months to plus 0.5. So basically, there is enough data to support that there are variable amounts of hyperopia in the immediate post-operative period. The moral of the story being that if you are treating a post-RK patient, counseling is the most important step, because you need to explain to these patients that their immediate post-operative vision may not be their final post-operative outcome. So in case you have had a surprise or a disaster in the initial first post-operative week, do not be alarmed. Don't be in a haste to think that you've chosen the wrong IOL power, or maybe you want to do an IOL exchange assuming that you've got some refractive surprise. No, there will be a lot of change in the refractive error over the next 3 months, and this is because of the multiple incisions changing the corneal biomechanics and therefore changing the optics of the eye. So the take-home message would be, because your optical zone is much smaller, usually again you would prefer a routine monofocal lens, and you have to be prepared for hyperopic surprises. So what we tend to do is we always try to err on the side of myopia. So even in the IOL power calculator, in the target refraction box, I like to choose a myopic refraction of -1 or -1.5 in the first eye. And then based on the result that you got in the first eye, you titrate the result of the second eye. You target myopia. Another very important thing to keep in mind is that you need to keep limbal incisions rather than clear corneal incisions. Also, depending on the number of cuts, you may not have too much space to make a clear corneal incision. So it's always better to just make it slightly more limbal. Proper patient counseling is very important. And last but not the least, you must have a special consent. This consent has to include the possibility of gaping of pre-existing wounds, because that may happen on table. In order to avoid this, you want to keep your phaco settings as low as possible to make sure that there is no opening up of the pre-existing wounds. And still, you must have this at the back of your mind. You must always have sutures ready on standby. In case anything opens up, you can suture it up. Even your main port, in case you feel that it's a little leaky or it's not strong enough, because these are biomechanically compromised corneas, you may want to take a suture. So in summary of today's instruction course, I would like to just summarize in short and say that IOL power calculation requires special attention in any patient of compromised corneas. And compromised corneas would include anything right from post-LASIK, post-PRK, post-RK. Counseling is the most important step. Without counseling, you are nowhere. Take that extra 10 minutes before the patient is sent in or before the patient has decided for surgery, because that will save you chair time after the surgery. You'd rather counsel the patient and warn him of what to expect rather than later on have a surprise and have to defend yourself later. Very important thing that we must keep in mind is unrealistic patient expectations of the patient have to be addressed. If a post-RK patient with 16 cuts is going to ask you for independence from glasses, you will have to bring him back to the face of this earth and tell him that this is going to be really difficult and maybe even impossible, because A, we are going to be putting a monofocal lens. B, we don't know what the reliability of the result is going to be. Because of the fact that right now so many patients are undergoing multifocal lenses, they don't realize that their corneas are compromised or that they are in a high risk category. So they would have the same expectation. Also, even regarding the time of the surgery, a routine phaco now in a good phaco surgeon's hand would be anywhere between 8-10 minutes to maybe around 15-20 minutes at max. But in these cases, we are going to go slow. Our parameters are going to be going slowly. Supposing you have an opening up of your wound, you need to explain all this to the patient. Otherwise, the family sitting outside when they are waiting during the surgery, the family sitting outside is going to be thinking, oh, the surgery is going to finish in 10 minutes. And supposing it does not finish in 10 minutes, then there's a lot of panic and a lot of anxiety that follows. And again, it increases your headache after the procedure. So you'd rather explain everything to the patient and the relative so that you are in a comfortable situation. Thank you very much. I'd like to take any questions.
Thank you, Dr. Karishma. That was a wonderful talk, particularly emphasizing on the point that detailed counseling needs to be done in patients who are post-RK. And I just had a patient last month, which I did a toric IOL in a post-RK patient. And patient was having around a 6 diopter toricity before the surgery, landed up with a 2 and a 2.25 diopter toricity after the surgery. So yes, these corneas are very, very compromised corneas, and the guarded prognosis has to be in detail explained to the patient. So I think we have time. I'll take a single question here. I'll ask any of the panelists to answer this. Suppose if you have a post-LASIK patient and you did the pentacam or the best possible topography and the IOL master, you see that the ablation is well centered and it's good optical zone LASIK done. Would you like to go for a multifocal, number one, and which multifocal would you like to go for? Because the current multifocals that are all available are negative aspheric multifocal IOLs, or you would like to go for an EDOF lens. Which kind of multifocals would you prefer? Anyone of the panelists can answer that, please.
I can answer that. So I have never so far implanted a multifocal lens in a post-refractive surgery patient. I must acknowledge that. But I do believe, or I'm made to believe by a lot of my colleagues, that an EDOF lens would be a game changer for these patients. So if I were to be faced with a situation, I think I would choose the EDOF lens. I would obviously make sure that there is a decent or a respectable optical zone. And what I've come to become more sensitive about is the amount of astigmatism when we are planning these multifocal patients, or even for this matter an EDOF patient which is post LASIK. Even a small amount of astigmatism is going to affect their post surgical outcome. So I think earlier, where we used to keep our cutoff as 1.5 maybe to put a toric lens for a monofocal and 1 for a multifocal, I think I've slightly reduced that threshold. So if it's a 0.75 astigmatism and I'm planning a multifocal or an extended focus also, then I would still think of putting in a toric, particularly in a post-refractive surgery, because their cornea is already, like we mentioned, a little biomechanically different than the others. So that's my opinion. Is there anyone with anything else to say?
I would differ slightly. So one, if everything is perfect and we still don't know whether we'll be at the right part. For me, usually we are planning at 6x6 for a normal case. For an post-LASIK cornea, I usually tell them that if you are able to read the 5 lines, the upper 5 lines, that is more than enough for me. So that is how I tell them. And in them, and planting and multifocal is like too much nerves here. I mean, I agree with the Karishma. Yes, EDOF may be a game changer. I have not done it. I stick to plain and simple monofocals, and I hope for the best after that.
I think I've been lucky enough to implant few, even in an hyperopic LASIK. So I've been lucky, I guess. Varun, Dr. Varun, please.
I would agree with the two of them, and I totally am against putting multifocals in corneas which have been touched earlier. But again, the problem is that these are the same patients who didn't want glasses earlier in their lives, and which is why they got LASIK. So they might come at you pretty strongly, wanting to have total spectacle freedom. And yes, extended depth of focus lenses may not be a game changer, but it is a definite, it's much better compromise for a patient who wants multifocality compared to the monofocal lenses. It gives you that much more refractive cushioning. than a monofocal lens. And yeah, I think it all goes hand in hand. You can't have a very black and white kind of a picture, how your patient is, how you counsel the patient, how much your patient understands the counseling that you've done for the patient, what is their lifestyle, etc. But yeah, 90% of the times I would err on the side of caution, and I would generally go with the EDOF lenses.
Okay,
I want to ask you about the SMILE patients.
I have put a lot of multifocals, post SMILE, post LASIK, post PRK. Will not do it in a post RK patient, definitely, but post SMILE, they're thought to have a better aberrometric profile. Post SMILE, I have about 6 eyes with PanOptix that I have put, which is a proper trifocal lens, and they're all like, I don't think getting a good refractive outcome is that difficult with the kind of gadgets that we have these days. I think maybe say post RK, like a toric IOL, that is more challenging to get in that situation. But if it's a good, well-centered, large zone treatment, then I think patients do well. I have put Symphonies, PanOptix. Nowadays, I have put even Miniwells, which are EDOF lenses, which don't have any rings on them. So Miniwell has also given really good refractive outcomes. So these patients are motivated for refractive freedom. I think their quality of vision post LASIK they know what to expect. They know what glare, halos, the initial recovery period. If you counsel them well enough, I think cataract surgery is a forgiving surgery. Once they've undergone refractive surgery, they kind of know what to expect after a multifocal also, I feel. So if you counsel them well enough, you can definitely go ahead with a multifocal lens.
Yeah, so I think we are bang on time. We have finished our time, and the conclusion is the same, that you have to counsel them properly if you want them to be happy and if you want yourself to be happy and at peace. So with this, I thank all my co-speakers, Dr. Karishma, Dr. Vishal, Dr. Ridhima, Dr. Varun, and the wonderful backend team of the AIOC for giving us this opportunity here to present at the first virtual AIOC conference, the 79th AIOC 2021. Thank you for all the support.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone.